Underoath are slippery customers. Influenced by hardcore, emo, metal, and industrial music, Underoath are a complex beast, straddling genres and mixing styles. They have also long been associated with the Christian metal scene, and yet the band have never been comfortable with that either. In fact, in more recent years, they've turned their back on this scene altogether. This is the story of Underoath, the band that exploded out of Florida in the late 90s and became one of the most intriguing musical projects of the last 3 decades. It's a story of crises, mental health crises, musical crises, religious crises, but it's also one of triumph. So let's go back to the beginning and find out exactly how Underoath came to be. It was vocalist Dallas Taylor and guitarist Luke Morton who first came up with the idea of Underoath back in November 1997. Inspired equally by emo and metalcore, and by their Christian faith, they began to recruit members from the local church community in Ocala, Florida. Drummer and backing vocalist Aaron Gillespie attended Morton's church and was the perfect fit. A keen musician, Gillespie had been told by members of the church that he was destined to travel the world playing drums. And that's exactly what he did. But the band was not complete yet. Corey Steger came in on guitar, while Octavio Fernandez was invited to play bass. And Underoath were ready to start playing shows and festivals around the state of Florida. Morton departed before Underoath could hit the studio. But in 1999, the four-piece signed with Take Hold Records and recorded debut LP Act of Depression, working with producer James Paul Wisner in Tampa, Florida. The album sounds a little different to Underoath's later music. There's a definite death metal influence, and tracks like A Love So Pure and Act of Depression sprawl beyond the 10-minute mark. It was fairly well received, although some reviewers were not so impressed by the album's overall vibe. All agreed there were flashes of brilliance though. These were talented young men, and they were going places. They went back into the studio just a year later to work on the second record. By now, Fernandez had moved to guitar, with Matt Clark joining on bass. They'd also recruited keyboard player Christopher Dudley, which enabled them to explore more epic death metal and black metal textures in their music. Cries of the Past was released in July 2000 and featured more of a black metal sound than the debut album. Its 5 songs cover 3/4 of an hour of music, and were described by some as Cradle Filth meets Hatebreed, just without any of Cradle's schlocky, blasphemous provocation. Already 2 albums into their career, Underoath were yet to hit their stride. They were also yet to truly understand themselves and what they were all about. This wasn't helped by constant lineup changes. After Cries of the Past, Clark left, replaced by William Notke. Corey Steger was also gone, with Tim McTagg coming in to take his place. By now, though, they had a much bigger platform. The first 2 albums had been pressed in small batches, quickly going out of print. This meant 2 things. 1, kids were struggling to get a hold of their music. Never a good thing. 2, there was a real word-of-mouth buzz about the Christian hardcore metalers from Florida. Definitely a good thing. This buzz got Underoath signed to Solid State Records. Solid State not only knew how to handle a Christian metal band, having put out records by Zao and Isocaris, but they also had the resources required to bring Underoath to a wider audience. This time, Underoath opted for a more traditional album structure. The Changing of Times is 10 minutes shorter than Cries of the Past, but features twice as many songs. Bloating and complexity for complexity's sake were 2 of the criticisms of Underoath's earlier work, but they'd come back lean, tough, and ready to shred. The record sold rapidly, becoming Solid State's biggest-selling debut album, and the music press loved it. If Underoath could just keep the core of their lineup together, they were surely destined for big things. Underoath had really begun to take flight with The Changing of Times, but what happened next nearly sent them crashing down to earth. In 2003, Notke, Fernandez, and Taylor announced they were leaving the band. Losing 3 members in one go is always going to be tough, but losing your vocalist, especially your founding vocalist, is usually the killing blow for any band. But not for Underoath. They understood their friend was facing serious mental health issues, and so they parted company on good terms. He would go on to form Maylene and the Sons of Disaster, and remain good friends with his former bandmates. But now Underoath needed a new vocalist. Enter Spencer Chamberlain. While playing shows with stand-in singer Matt Tarpey, Underoath had shared stages with their fellow Floridians This Runs Through. Spencer got the band, and when This Runs Through began to wind down, he agreed to join Underoath. Along with Grant Brandel on bass and James Smith on guitar, the new lineup hit the studio basically straight away, getting back together with producer James Paul Wisner to develop their new album. The recording was tough on the new vocalist, and on backing vocalist Aaron Gillespie. Both blew out their voices during the sessions, with Gillespie developing blisters on his tonsils. But the struggle was worth it. They emerged that spring with a new record, the Screamo metalcore behemoth that is They're Only Chasing Safety. The album was a sleeper hit in the mainstream and took 7 years to finally go gold. But on the post-hardcore scene, it was a game changer. The mixture of fragile beauty and punishing aggression was a breath of fresh air, and tracks like Reinventing Your Exit became immediate classics. The success of Chasing Safety catapulted the band to new creative heights. While heading out to tour the record, they began working on new stuff, incorporating heavier elements into their sound, and also more atmospheric, experimental passages. They also had stability for the first time in a long while. Underoath had gone through a lot of changes, but with Spencer, Tim, James, Grant, Aaron, and Christopher, it looked like they finally had a core unit they could rely on. Defining the Great Line was released in June 2006 and was a much more immediate hit. While the previous album had been a sleeper, The Great Line peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200. The band had seemingly done the impossible. They'd introduced Christian Screamo to a mainstream audience, and that mainstream audience was lapping it up. And they hadn't even had to join a major label to pull this off. The Great Line was released on Tooth and Nail, the parent label of Solid State Records, and a leader in the Christian metalcore game. Tours with Taking Back Sunday and fellow Christian hardcore greats Norma Jean followed. They also joined up with Dallas once again, touring with Maylene and the Sons of Disaster before hitting the Warped Tour. 2008 was a busy year for the band. They dropped Survive Kaleidoscope, their first live album, and they hit the studio to record 6th album, Lost in the Sound of Separation. This was another evolution for the band, and included doomier industrial hues as the group explored new territories. It was also very well received, with massive sales and stunning reviews from the music press. Maybe some things do come in threes. Underoath had released 3 great albums that put them on the map. And then, they released 3 more great records that rocketed them off the freaking planet. Now bona fide mainstream stars, what could happen next for Underoath? Could they keep up the momentum with 3 more hits, or was this particular rocket about to explode? Outwardly, everything seemed to be going great for Underoath, but inwardly Aaron Gillespie was struggling. As Underoath was blowing up, the drummer and singer was suffering with severe anxiety issues. These anxiety issues began to manifest themselves as physical symptoms. As Aaron began to feel ill, seemingly for no reason, he developed hypochondria, which in turn fueled his anxiety. It was a vicious cycle, and the drummer was at a breaking point. He decided he couldn't continue. He played his final show with Underoath in Italy in April 2010, and then he quit the band. But Underoath were already writing their new album. Drafting in former Norma Jean drummer Daniel Davison, they completed Disambiguation and released it through Tooth and Nail and Roadrunner that November. Underoath struggled on without their founding member. They played with Me Without You, As Cities Burn and Let Live, and released the compilation record Anthology 1999 to 2013. But life without Aaron wasn't easy. They'd survived the turmoil of losing Dallas Taylor back in 2003, but they were finding it difficult to go through all that again. In October 2012, they announced their plans to break up. The curtain would fall in 2013. The final show came in January 2013 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Aaron Gillespie returned for this swan song, and Underoath called time on their glittering 16-year career. The Christianity that Underoath had embraced from day one had stayed with them throughout their career. They were a Christian band. Some of their fans were Christian and some were not, but faith was a constant influence. However, that faith had never been their sole driving force, and this was something Spencer Chamberlain and other members had been eager to express, even years before the breakup. As early as 2006, Chamberlain had explained that Underoath were not like your average Christian band. While Christianity had been the backbone of their lives, it wasn't necessarily the backbone of their lyrics. "It's not like every song is a lesson from the Bible or something," he said. "It's just normal life struggles." Christopher Dudley also hinted that the Christian faith wasn't necessarily the core of Underoath in an interview the following year, when he described how most of their fans were not Christian, and yet they were still connecting deeply with the music. This was no secret. This was something Underoath were very public about. But still, 2015 represented a curveball, in more ways than one. In case you haven't guessed already, the Underoath story did not come to an end in 2013. First, the band began teasing their return. In the summer of 2015, they began posting "Rebirth is coming," along with a timer ticking down towards zero. Zero would come on August 24th, 2015. This was the first curveball. Underoath were back, along with Gillespie. And in fact, they couldn't even wait for August 24th. On the 17th, they announced they'd be headlining the Self-Help Festival in California the following March. And they still had an uneasy relationship with Christian music. Later that year, Gillespie and Chamberlain dropped more hints about friction between the band and the scene. When asked about how Christian music had changed from 2005 to 2015, Chamberlain was candid. "It hasn't changed much at all, and that's what sucks about Christian music," he said. "We try to do something different. We're the sore thumb. I know why people hate Christians and think the scene is lame and the people are lame, because for the most part, they are. That's why we're here trying to change it." In a separate interview, Gillespie said, "I'm definitely a Christian, but I don't think Underoath should be a Christian band." It wasn't quite a split from Christianity, but it did suggest Underoath had grown increasingly uncomfortable with their reputation. It took the band a little while to put together their comeback album. Erase Me was released in 2018 to significant fanfare. 8 years without an LP hadn't dulled the impact of Underoath, and the album met with excellent reviews and strong sales. But it seemed the recording process had hardened Underoath's spiritual views. On releasing the single On My Teeth in February 2018, the band tossed the world another curveball when they updated their Spotify biography to reflect a whole new position. The band, who once openly and without apology professed their faith-based worldview on stage nightly, the biography stated, have since moved beyond the realm of seemingly impenetrable polemics. They explained how the album Erase Me illustrates those moments of sanctuary, anxiety, betrayal, and conflict that inevitably arise when humanity grapples with belief systems. Needless to say, journalists and fans were eager to learn more about what had happened. Spencer Chamberlain went public, explaining his position and telling the world he was no longer a Christian. "While playing in a Christian band," he said, "I held a huge burden, and I got burnt badly and was treated awfully." Chamberlain would explain that religion is not wrong for everyone, but for me, it was wrong. "It ruined my life, turned me into an addict, and people were awful to me the whole time. I never felt more alone in my life than when I was a Christian." Underoath's new spiritual approach to life was not exclusive. They still welcomed their Christian fans and offered connection, understanding, and togetherness with people of all cultural and religious backgrounds who listened to their records and came out to their shows. But Chamberlain said he could no longer stay quiet about his personal experiences, both as a Christian musician and as a Christian, period. Regardless of your own religious views and your own spiritual beliefs, this kind of honesty has to be admired. Underoath have released 2 more records since their 2018 comeback. First, 2022's Voyeurist, a deeply philosophical record. Voyeurist explores the meaning of life, death, and dichotomy between the two. And of course, it still manages to rock at the same time. And then there was The Place After This One, released in March 2025. To be honest, I haven't had a chance to listen to this one as I'm writing this before it was released. But if teaser tracks like All the Love Is Gone are anything to go by, it's complex, melodic, brutal, and epic. So just what do we do about a band like Underoath? From the beginning, they've shown that they're not willing to be pigeonholed. Not quite pure emo, not quite hardcore, not quite metal, but instead a swirling mix of all three, and more besides. Underoath are difficult to pin down musically. And in terms of philosophy and spirituality, they've long been Christian metal adjacent, but not quite part of that scene either. The band's songwriting scope is just too broad to fit into a category like that. Maybe we're overcomplicating things. Perhaps the answer is simple. We don't need to do anything with a band like Underoath. We've just got to be thankful that such an innovative and exciting band ever graced our eardrums, and be excited to see what's coming next. Thanks for joining me once again on this. What do you think about Underoath? What's your favorite record? Do you agree about keeping music and faith separate, or are culture and spirituality just too intertwined? Let's talk about it in the comments, and please like, subscribe, and stick around for another fascinating emo deep dive in just a moment.